Hi, my name is Graciela.
Namir, Joseph,
Hosea Kissy,
Tania Donato,
Anna Quinlan,
Amar Patel,
Winston,
Streeter,
Jason,
Gabby Crooks, Zifnan,
Jillian,
Elisa Savas,
Carolina,
Aline Perez,
David Iho,
Greer Harris,
Emily,
and I'm
and I'm
a Stanford admit.
I wrote my Common App essay about my experience as a child born to Nigerian parents. Just kind of the differences that exist between our educational experiences and then also like personal, like homely experiences. Kind of a bit of a generation gap that occurs between me and my parents, and how it's kind of shaped and crafted me as a student and as a child born to immigrant parents. So I just kind of talked about that experience.
I wrote my Common App essay about how I bite my nails, like how the anxiety that I have at home with different like household issues and helping my dad run his business, how that like contributed towards my nail biting, and then how my experience at this summer program I went with SES Noonan at Amherst, how that diminished my nail biting, and how I hope my experience at Noonan at Amherst can like transferred to my Stanford experience.
I chose the general prompt, and I wrote about how I was raised in a very STEM-based environment. Both my parents got STEM degrees, like my grandparents got STEM degrees. I go to a school that pushes STEM heavily, and I found my escapes in humanities, but I know that I'll always find a home in STEM. And how I used to finish my work early in physics in order to leave and join the AP Human Geography class and actually participate and like be in that class, and I really enjoyed it.
So the prompt that I wrote about was discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. I wrote about my life through the lens of a car ride, and I wrote specifically about how I went from STEM to the humanities, and more specifically political science and public service.
I was born in San Diego, California, to non-immigrant Mexican parents, which is very confusing to Americans. But the thing is, my family lives in Tijuana, which is right next to the border. So basically, I was born in a private hospital in California, which means automatically if you're born in the US, you get to be an American citizen no matter who your parents are. And then growing up, I grew up in Mexico, but then at 13 years old, I started 8th grade in the US. And for 5 years, I crossed the international border between Tijuana and San Diego, waking up at 5 a.m. each morning, getting to the border, crossing the border, going to school. After school, I got back to the border, crossed the border, back to Mexico, and went home. And my Common App essay was just me talking about how my teenage years were shaped by the idea of having these two countries just so intermingled in my life, just having both cultures very present while I was growing up.
I wrote about the culture at my high school and how basically from it didn't value women's education. My religion teacher told me that women should basically only be housewives ever. That's all they should be. So then I tried to start the Women in STEM Club, and my school told me that there was no issue with the number of women in STEM because women weren't supposed to be in STEM. They were supposed to be at home taking care of children, I guess. And so I fought it really hard, and eventually a few of my friends and I got the club approved, and the school eventually gave us a major award that was only given to those who make the biggest difference in the school community. So it was definitely risky because I wrote about how much my school administration sucks. It was a 750 word roast of old white people kind of, but I toned it down in the last paragraph and it worked out and I liked it.
I first started off by talking about this game I liked called Civilization Revolution, and I played it when I was a little kid. And I basically attributed that game to how my interest in economics started, and then I started transitioning to where I am now. Essentially, I started just talking about but I became less idealistic with what economics was. I cited the fact that I have to drive 30 minutes away to get to my school that I attend to now, because the schools around my actual home aren't necessarily up to par to quality education. So I talked about that and like how that experience between like actually like seeing like the change in like American socioeconomics, like being so determined on zip code and like experiencing that, and like also seeing like the dilution of minorities as you went to like the richer area within like the school that I attended in. I began to wonder like why did all these like phenomenon occur, and that's what invigorated me to like do the research project with Pioneer Academics.
I basically wrote about my experience. I moved to New Zealand in 7th grade and moved back to the US in 9th grade, and I essentially wrote about my experience going there and how I became a part of this new community and how I found new talents and new interests and really got involved and took a hold of all the opportunities that were there. And I picked it because my time there was really important to me, but I also picked it because it seemed like being in a new place and having all of these experiences basically mirrored what I was about to do in college. So I used that as an opportunity to show how engaged and proactive I would be once I got to campus.
I wrote about how I was amazed by a chair on a trip that I took to London, and how that perspective of seeing potential and seeing inspiration in ordinary things really just shaped my life and how I viewed things, especially in regards to science.
I wrote my coming up essay about my story, kind of my life at Lima. So I spent 9 years in Lima, and I wrote about how I overcame the language barrier, how I learned 2 languages at the same time, and how I overcame the cultural barrier, and how I identify myself right now by living almost half of my life at a foreign country.
So I wrote my Common App essay about growing up in Pittsburgh for 10 years and then moving to Memphis and then going back to Pittsburgh for the Intel ISF Science Fair. Growing up in Pittsburgh, it was a really homogenous city and I rarely saw people of color. But then moving to Memphis, it was a complete turnaround. So there was lots of racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic diversity. And then when I went back to Pittsburgh for the science fair, it was kind of ironic because it was like the biggest opportunity for diversity in my life.
I wrote about building an electric skateboard and then how there was a lot of issues with safety with electric skateboards and how I'm designing like a controller thing that's supposed to make them safer. It's like kind of involved, but it's basically just a description of that and like why I did it and why I like building stuff.
My essay, it's kind of a funny story. I talked about first how within the span of 3 weeks, whenever you flip on the light switch, the light like burnt out. And I talked about how I was an X-Man and how I had the power to manipulate electrical charges, and I knew that I wasn't applying to Charles Xavier School for the gifted or gifted youngsters, but I would be able to make positive change wherever I went. And based on the same theme of X-Men and comics and Marvel, I outlined my 3 pivotal events in my life based on a volume and an issue of a comic. So like each one was its own little mini story, and discussed how instead of burning out the lights in people, I will use my power to ignite the light in the minds of many and bring forward positive change in the world.
My essay was basically, I did this like 2 a.m. thing. It was this metaphor about like intersections about on this like, I took it from like where the street I live on, and I just did a whole thing about like my identity, like my family background, and then like my interests like academically, and then I just there's like this like theme of like intersections. So I really liked it. It was a pretty unique, like weird, kooky essay, but that kind of reflected how I think. So it was a pretty good essay in my opinion.
I kind of discussed how I escaped beauty standards currently present in popular society by going natural, as you can see, and how I kind of embrace my own personal beauty, and you don't necessarily have to be like fight the current beauty standards to embrace your own beauty. But what I kind of focused on was how I wrote my own definitions for beauty instead of letting other people define it for me.
My Common App essay was basically about me living in Ohio and like hating it, and then moving, well not moving, but like experiencing Massachusetts in the summer, and then reflecting on how like that made me who I am, basically.
My Common App essay was about my name, Akosi Akisi. Like, I'm Ghanaian, South African, Ethiopian. So talking about my name like really brought in that cultural heritage, and it's honestly influenced my life. Just because like literally every first day of school, like I have to say my name 500 different times, and I kind of talked about that experience and how having a unique kind of name that's really in tune to like my cultural heritage, it allowed me to have a special kind of insight into like evaluating people. I feel like I was more socially perceptive with having my name just because I feel like I valued like people's identities more, and kind of that's what my essay was about. Did the prompt that was like talk about an identity that like your application would be incomplete about, and I kind of like made it ironic and was like, I don't even know if it's irony, but I kind of talked about how like literally like my application would be incomplete if I didn't have my name on it. So I kind of like went off of that.